Hello, everyone. Welcome to another CrowdLinker Fireside Chat. I'm Aram Melkoumov, the host. Thanks for tuning in. On the show, as you know, I'm interviewing product and innovation leaders who are working on big industry disruptive problems from within their large organizations. The guests that I have on the show have been in the trenches and have lots of practical advice to share about building quality digital products, staying agile, and fostering an innovation mindset. Today, I'm joined here by Dustin Kirkland to discuss managing products at startups versus enterprises, as well as the importance of user personas and critical user journeys and how to approach reorgs at a fast-growing company. Just a quick bio on Dustin. He's the current Chief Product Officer at Apex, which is a digital wealth management solution that is set to IPO and is valued at nearly $5 billion. At his current role, he's responsible for the product and strategy of Apex Fintech Solutions. And previously, Dustin has held engineering and product roles at IBM, Canonical, I always get that wrong, Gazzang, and Google. So without further ado, awesome to have you on our show today, Dustin. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
How do I say that name correctly?
Canonical. Canonical. Four syllables. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think we always regret it to some extent. The name, it's got such a great meaning, but people trip over it all the time.
Yeah, it's too bad I tripped over it as well. All right. First question I have for you, Dustin, is if you could just maybe I give a bit of a bio there, but we'll love it to come from your own perspective, a bit of a bio about you, what you actually do at Apex as well, and also where you're based.
Yeah, so I'm based in Austin, Texas. I've lived here 21 years. Love it. Just such a great outdoorsy space. You can really appreciate the food and the culture and the music, and yeah, a booming tech scene for sure. I'm an engineer at heart. That's what my degree is in. If I'm messing around with technology outside of work, I still do a little bit of open source coding. Someone asked me at a dinner party, what do you do for a living? I usually say I'm an engineer, and I don't know. I mean, I could say product, I could say I'm an executive, but I'm an engineer at heart. So it really starts there for sure. But I really enjoy applying engineering and technology to business problems. And that's the part where at some point in my career, about 10 years ago, I switched over from being a pure developer or manager of developers and started focusing on the business side of technology.
And why was that? What led you to persuade that tangent in your career?
I started as a developer at IBM, managed a small team, was a manager and an architect, all on the open source side of things, 8 years at IBM, and then joined Canonical. So we were the company behind Ubuntu Linux. Again, as an engineer and a manager, I left Canonical, came back later, but I left Canonical and was a CTO at a startup. The startup I had been a technical advisor to. The startup had taken some open source code that I had authored around encrypted file systems, had applied it in an interesting way to turnkey encryption of databases, especially healthcare and PII HIPAA regulated data. And once they raised a round of funding from venture capitalists, I joined as the CTO, and it was definitely not an explicit product title or function, but I found myself constantly trying to solve the business problems around this great open source code and technology we had. How do we sell this? How do we price it? How do we market it? And so without really knowing it, I think I was operating as a product focused CTO. It was when that company exited to Cloudera. It was a nice exit. There's that, most of that team is still the security team behind Cloudera Hadoop Solutions. I went back and rejoined Canonical and was recruited back to Canonical by the founder and CEO to be a product manager and to help monetize the hundreds of millions of instances of Ubuntu that were out there and freely deployed in the world. We had a business problem at Canonical, which was how to make money on Ubuntu, and so that's what brought me into the product side of things, and I gravitated toward it and stuck with it. Was a product manager at Google for a while, and lead a product team at Apex now.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for that background. Question on that. You have that vast experience between startups and enterprises. Enterprise, IBM and Google, and startups, Canonical and Gazzang. What are the key things that come to mind about the difference in the work experience between those mammoths to some of the startups?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've spent almost exactly half of my career in the sort of the big company, the IBMs and Googles, and half of my career in the growth mode startups, both of which have their appeal. There are fun things about each of the different organizations. Obviously the resources that Google can bring to bear or IBM can bring to a problem is pretty remarkable. But it can be a bit like, trying to man and steer an aircraft carrier. It's not always as nimble and efficient as, startup world. So that's one of the biggest differences, is how quickly decisions or investments can be made in the startup world, how many people you have to build a consensus with or get approval from, especially as a product manager, super important. Very different in the big company versus small company mindset. I think increasingly big companies have come to realize that, very much to the, the enterprise, the mammoths, like you said, the credit. Some are taking really deliberate steps to empower smaller teams, especially product managers, to operate with some degree of autonomy, some degree of critical decision making that is scoped into the responsibility well, that helps breed a little bit of that startup style efficiency inside of, a world brand name company with 100,000 employees,
And what are those things that they're changing? What is that methodology, that approach, the tactics, activities, or whatever that these larger companies are now trying to adopt in order to give those product managers autonomy or, line of sight to a P&L or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned it even in your intro. It sort of starts with or harkens back to Agile, but that's very much on the engineering side of things. Agile methodologies, 2-week sprints, sprint demos at the end of it. Restart the cycle, do it over and over again. On the product side of things, Agile is a piece of it for sure. But there's another set of methodologies that I've used and adapted, and I'm a technical advisor to a couple of startups, and I've helped them implement as well. It really orients around a cycle, a cyclic nature. The cycle is quite nice though, in that we go through the exact same process every time. We do 3 per year. 16 weeks is how long we plan out a cycle. 3 times 16 is 48. That allows us to discount 4 weeks of the year for Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's, the end of year holidays, and we kind of put a week in the summer just for summer breaks, right? But 3 times 16 is 48. We do that over and over and over again. Starts with prioritization. We take the backlog. We product managers take the backlog, prioritize that with our stakeholders, the client-facing teams, ops, engineers, just everyone that we, product managers serve. We get our stack ranked list of priorities. We then take that and work with our engineering leads, and we fit those stack rank, the top as much as we can of those priorities. We fit that into the amount of time, 16 weeks, and the number of people that we have, roughly the engineering teams. We take those two as the fixed constants, and then the variable in the equation is how much, the scope. We fit that to the 16-week cycle. And then as of the first week, we're off and running. We start executing against that. We track it, KPIs, dashboards, meticulously tracked reporting, burn down charts all the way along the way. 2-week sprints inside of the 16 weeks. And some things, we're a software as a service, a SaaS company. So, when it's ready, it goes through testing, Q&A. It can be rolled out to production. We don't have to wait until the 16th week of the cycle, which is very different than, I worked on Kubernetes. You ship a tarball at the end of the cycle. I worked at Canonical. You ship an ISO, a CD at the end of the a DVD at the end of the cycle. Software as a service has to be more, iterative than that, and we're perfectly iterative. And then we do that, and then there's a halfway point, a check-in point, a review at the midpoint in the cycle, and then we do that over and over again. And it's nice. It runs like a train, like clockwork. You get into the habit, you do it over and over again. We've been doing it for 2.5 years, 7 cycles. It basically runs itself once you get to a certain amount of critical mass. And I would say, as a product leader, it's great to build on such a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm. And so you plan out the business priorities for the year, and then you break it out. But how do you also level set or stress test that what you're building is still accurate or needs to be built? Where do you incorporate like the user feedback from or the client feedback from into the iterations?
Yeah, great question. So to your first point, we adopt themes, strategies for the whole year, but then we break that into those 4-month, those 16-week cycles. We only make detailed commitments for the 16-week cycles, right? We've got a pretty good idea of what we're going to do for the whole year, and I can talk to clients and share feedback and get feedback from them and incorporate. The incorporation of that, first of all, it's constant. Document everything, always in SharePoint or Google Drive. There should be multiple cursors clicking at all times with multiple people taking notes when you're in a roadmap review with clients. And I talk to our top 20 clients 3 times a year, and almost all of our clients at some point, I'll have a touch point over the course of the year. That feedback is documented and goes on to the product backlog. We try to capture feature requests as critical user journeys that get logged in our database. And then that's the backlog that the product managers are prioritizing those 3 times per year. During a cycle, we try and not disrupt the commitments we made to the 16 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. We try to lock that plan and stick to it for about 3 or 4 months. I've helped some startups adapt this, the 16 weeks. We've adapted it to 12 weeks. We've adapted it to 6 weeks. I haven't gone much smaller than 6 weeks. But the process can adapt as long as it iterates, and it really depends on the size of the scope of the team and the product and how big the thing is. For our company, our product, 16 weeks has felt about right. Yearly or twice a year would be too slow. 4 times a year is where you start getting into it. It's a little bit frenetic, and it's nice to align with quarterly goals, but Q4 is always a mess with Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, end of year holidays. January can be tricky if you've got a Chinese New Year or something. It can be tough. So we settled on 3 cycles per year, and every one of those cycles is an opportunity to recalibrate. I'll say one more thing, which is we do have a process by which exceptions are made. Where we call them late breaking, but late breaking critical items come in unexpectedly. We have a process by which we trade out something that was committed for a new thing that preempts it. There's a lot of communication that goes on to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening, and that there are appropriate sign-offs and communication back to clients if we're going to miss a deadline.
And so what makes that exception?
So I mean, in our business, it's stock market. It's something like the nature of just the unpredictable nature of the market. We provide brokerage solutions. Yeah. A lot's happened over the last couple of years that we couldn't have predicted. In other companies, especially some of the startups I advise, it's something of a competitive nature. Your biggest client acquired your competitor. That's unexpected. You don't know that's going to happen. Now you've got to adjust your roadmap, right? In bigger companies, it might be, let's go back to M&A. You just acquired some new technology, so now we need to adapt the roadmap to match it. And it's not always about acquisitions. It's something, usually of a competitive nature, just something in the market that's changed that you didn't know 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. Who knew crypto was going to have this incredible spike and run up, right? Who knew, anything about the GameStop short squeeze, or Apple and Tesla split their stock on the same exact day. None of that was predicted.
Predictable,
And, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, very interesting. No, thanks for sharing that insight. We had a chance to connect about this before, and I think I want to spend some time on it. I want to talk about like user journeys and personas. So, as a product studio, when we work with a lot of clients, a lot of the times when products are misaligned, and there's a lot of risk, is because they're released without much understanding of who's going to be using them and why. So I want to get your take on walking us through your process of what you do around defining user personas and, more importantly, the critical user journeys.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's right at the heart of what we do. I would call it the like atomic unit that our products are built upon, our PRDs are built upon. It all starts with a CUJ, a critical user journey. The way we structure our CUJs is pretty simple. It's easy to remember. It's a CUJ is a paragraph. It's usually handwritten, nicely written English, a little story that answers 4 questions in 4 distinct sentences. It answers the question who, what, when, and why. Okay, so start with the who. And that's the persona, that's the who. Sometimes we make up names of people. Sometimes it's a real person or representative of a group of people. That person has a job function or a life goal or something they're trying to do. So Sally is a network administrator trying to identify, I'm making this up as I go, trying to identify a security intrusion in her company. Okay. So that's about the length of a first sentence. We usually give the person a name so that later when we're talking about different personas, we're talking about Sally when we're talking about the security network admin, right? And we'll have whiteboards full of, what Sally's trying to do. And we'll talk to Sally and talk about Sally as if she's a real person because that's what she represents, right? But just as easily, Sally could be a non-technical person. So, Susan's an investor trying to, buy options for the first time or something like that, right? But that's the who, okay? What, I kind of went into what right there for Susan. What is, what is that user trying to do? And I just said, Susan's trying to buy options. The who is, she's a first-time investor, has never done this before. What she's trying to do, Sally is trying to identify a network security problem. Susan's trying to invest in this derivative investment vehicle, right? And we'll get pretty clear about the what's, right? When is an interesting one. It's about the conditions that bring that person to this moment. And it might be because, Susan just fell into a whole bunch of money and now she's trying to protect her portfolio against a downturn, right? So she wants to buy some protective options. When is Sally trying to solve this network problem? Well, it's in the middle of the night and she's actually on vacation, right? So now we're going to design a product that helps solve her problem, right? Now, why is the third piece, and this is, you'll hear a lot of emphasis if you study the materials on product management. We're definitely the kids that asked why a whole lot. So if you've got kids and they ask you why a whole lot, maybe there's a career in product management for them somewhere along the way. But why helps us get to the heart of, of the solution that we're going to build. Note that how is not part of any of this, and that's super important. How we leave to the engineers, and I say that as an engineer as well. Like in a previous life, don't tell me how. I'll figure out the how. Just tell me what you want me to build. Who am I building it for? Why am I building it? And give me some of the conditionals that I will build it for. And then when we're building a product, that CUJ might explode into dozens of combinations. It might be one person who wants to do a whole bunch of different things. And so we'll have a column where we'll draw, a matrix of that one person wants to do this and this and this and this. And then there's another column which might have more lines, which is all the whys, all the conditions that might put them into the, the when they're going to do this. And the why might be for very different reasons for that same person or different people. But that combination then gives us a really rich set of CUJs that define a product. And when given to us an engineer and a set of engineers, an engineering team, with that, they know they can really hone in on how they're going to solve this problem and what they're going to build. And then finally, the person that gets a whole lot of use out of this is the Q&A team, the quality assurance and testing team, because as they start writing their functional tests, they're going to write tests that look like, Sally and Susan in these two examples.
Interesting. And so, I mean, thank you so much for explaining that. I think it's a gem in terms of that process. How do you always go and stress test against this when you actually have the product or you have features that are coming up? Do you constantly think about, hey, what is Sally going to think of this feature? How would she use it? And how do you go through that kind of decision process to see what it is that you do end up building? Are you constantly looking at those CUJs and your personas and like really kind of identifying with everything that you do, like at the beginning of a sprint or when you're grooming something? How does that work?
Yeah, I'd say that we try to start small and then crawl, walk, run. I know it's so proverbial at this point, but we try to start small. It has been important to me to democratize the CUJ writing process, and that's why it's so simple. 4 sentences. It can be as long as a tweet. It's 280 characters or less. We've created 2 different vectors for CUJs to be written. One is for the client-facing team, and that's usually in Salesforce or something, like that, a CRM.
Mm-hmm.
That just asks those 4 questions, hit submit, and voila. The sales rep who is in a conversation with a prospect, we don't solve their problem today, but I wish we would. You can tell me about that around the water cooler, but it doesn't count unless you write the CUJ, click submit, and it goes on our backlog. And then for the more technical folks, it's the same 4 questions, and we use a Jira or some other, ticketing queue. But both of them feed into the same CUJ database. Those are just front ends that drop that into the same database, and then obviously tie that back to, Google Sheets in our case, where we can manage these, using the primitives of a spreadsheet, basically. But I said start small. So it's just like, I was just in a meeting, a client asked us for a thing that we don't sell today, but I wish we sold it. If you want to write me a feature request, write it as a CUJ, and boom, it's on the backlog, and we'll get to it. And then our product management team, we prioritize those. Everything that comes in once a week in my weekly staff meeting, we'll go through that list and make sure that everyone's aware of the new things that came in, and we try to identify patterns. That's one thing that it's important to have a group of people looking at it. Hey, I've seen something like that. I was talking to another customer who said it differently, but they want, the solution's going to be the same thing. To get that magic working, you need multiple, eyes on those problems and try to extract the signal from the noise. To your question about going back and measuring it, what would Sally look like? Honestly, the answer to that is super elegant and simple. At some point, we get that thing in front of the real Sally, and it may not be Sally, it's the CTO or the CIO or the director of operations of one of our clients, or maybe it's a retail investor or consumer, the person buying your widget. Literally get it in front of them, and at some point connect that hypothetical to reality and ask them, and if you're in a consumer or retail B2C sort of business, that's the rate your Uber driver. How many stars did you give this product? How was your stay? How was your meal? Walking out of the airport, what was your experience? Red, yellow, green. Get that real feedback and do that systematically. And then anecdotally, when you have an opportunity as a product manager to meet with a client or a customer, ask them, literally just ask them, hey, what do you think of this feature? How does this set with you? What would you do different? What would you do if you had my job? That's a fun question to ask sometimes.
I like that one. What would you do if you had my job? I should use that one more when I do my own sales calls. Go ahead.
Hey, you're the head of product of this product that you're using. What would you do if you were me? Sometimes that's disarming, and sometimes that's empowering, and it lets someone think for you and actually empower them, make them really happy to give that kind of feedback. They're not giving feedback to a product manager. They are now hypothetically the product manager of the, pick a product. We drive a minivan. You're the product manager of Toyota Sienna. What would you do differently about this product? Boy, my wife would give you a list,
Yeah, that's true. Some of the best insights that we've ever gotten about the product actually came from the clients.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right?
It's honest. It's unvarnished,
It is. It is. Cool. Next set of questions I wanted to go through was around organizational design, and I think you have some good opinions on like how to handle reorgs. So I think in specifically the investment industry, I've seen some companies go through a serious boom in the last like year or two, including probably your company. Your team alone, from what I recall, you said grew from 6 people to 60 people. So I want to ask, and I think it's probably going to be relevant for a lot of scale-up audience members of ours, but how do you deal with that type of growth and ensuring that you're doing a proper reorg in the process to make sure that you have the right methodology in place and the right structure to make sound decisions on?
Yeah, boy, it's a tricky one that has 100 wrong answers and almost zero, right answers. But I mean, I can share a couple of the things that I think have worked and maybe, not worked in the past. The first one I would say, which no one ever, told me in my career, but I came to learn over some point, is organizations, they reorg. It happens a lot. I remember being really disrupted and nervous the first couple of times I saw a reorg at IBM, as a junior employee, and executives were moving, leaving, shifting, promotions, whatever it might be, especially to a junior employee in what's supposed to be a big, stable company. It happens, and expect it to happen. I've seen some companies, talk about reorg season. It's a season, especially around the end of the year. You get in the fall or at end of the fiscal year, it's reorg season. Of course, there's going to be some people moving around. So I would say if you're affected by it, just sort of expect it and deal with it, work within the bounds, as opposed to, not expecting it and being, nervous, frustrated, whatever, anxious that might be. That's the first piece. The second, if you're in a position where you are, part of the reorg, either participating or maybe a third step, we can talk about where you're sort of leading and designing a great organization. I try to err on the side of communication, trying to talk to people, at least gathering opinions and writing them down, sketching out notes. Not everyone, especially junior people in the org, are going to, get their way or get their wishes, but at the very least, you could hear them out. Hey, what's working? What's not working? What would you do if you were in my position? If you had my job, what would you do? It's not going to necessarily go down like that, but get talking and let's hear about it. I try to do a couple of laps around the organization to understand what's working, what's not working, and what some people believe great would look like. Now, all of that just feeds into a bigger process, and not all of it is, even as an officer in the company, are you in control of. There are powers that exist outside of that. But what I found, though, is that having at least try to make people feel like they were part of the journey, as opposed to, just sort of handed a playbook and said, here's what's new. It's a difference between a team that I think, feels like they're part of the process versus, not, frankly, excluded. The next thing I would say is that the big question that I try to ask myself when thinking about a reorg, and that could be a matter of promoting a manager or moving people within a team. I try to make sure that that's not reactionary and instead designed. And the key question is, what does the team need to look like in a couple of years? And your org may differ whether the right number is in a year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But what does it need to look like in the future? Not today, not just trying to solve a point problem. Hey, I'm overloaded, have too many reports, or hey, this person is got promoted. I need to put some resources underneath that person or something like that. Those are like momentary blips in time that will pass. The big question is, what does success look like in 2 or 3 years time? And what's the right design to get us to there? Not to solve the today problem, but to solve the big problem. That's I think the most insightful piece. And then the second question that goes along with that is, how will I know if that worked? How will I know if this structure change solved a problem or set us up for success or not? In which case, let's get back into the design room and rethink this.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing I always, I'm curious about is like, once you do a reorg, how do you know if it was successful or not? How do you know if it was a big waste of time and money at the end of the day? And yeah, for me, I haven't participated in one. I've never really looked in what happens, but did you go through one yourself?
Yeah, a number of them. I would say that most of the reorgs that I've been part of have been really about, and there's a couple of different, types and reasons. Sometimes you're trying to turn around a failing business or whatever. That really hasn't been I don't have that experience. I know people who do. Most of the reorgs I've been a part of have been about setting a company up for scale, for massive growth, for hockey stick 10x growth. We're 6 people, we're going to turn into 60. We're 100 people, we're going to turn into 1,000. That's where, again, trying to figure out what does a company need to look like in a year or 2 or 3. It's really about designing an organization for scale. So, there are just some human limitations of once you get to a certain number of direct reports, there aren't enough hours in a week to have a one-on-one with everyone. There's not enough time to approve expense reports and PTO. And, those are like the little ticky-tack things that add up once you hit some number of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 20 reports. There's also a big difference between, someone who's super senior, independent, self-starter, give them, a one-liner of here's an assignment and they knock it out of the park in, a fixed amount of time, versus building an org around junior people that you're going to train up and train to do a good job. And they're just going to take a little more attention, a little more education and attention, And so to some extent, designing an organization for growth and scale is about installing the right leadership and pods that, allow that sort of pod to swim together in the same direction without a single leader or executive having, just doesn't have the hours in a day or a week to give all the attention necessary in every direction.
It's really interesting. And like, I want to ask you, because you've already done these a couple of times and participated in it, but with your learnings now, if you were to build an org with your knowledge now from scratch, how would you approach it?
A product org specifically, or
org.
Wow, great question. And honestly, not one I've thought hard about, but applying what I know, I think I would have a core set of senior top lieutenants that can be trusted with big picture strategy and execution that can handle both sides of that, both the strategy and the execution. And depending on the scope, that might be one person, it might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, right? Call those like level, we could spend hours talking about levels, but I'm thinking, director, group level, product managers who can manage other product managers. They can do it themselves. They have to be able to do it themselves, but they have to be more effective, even more effective and productive, leading a team. Okay. Self-starters, good with ambiguity, deal with lack of information really well, can take a fair amount of direction, instruction, top-notch communicators can communicate up. If I'm out or not around, they can replace me and talk to the senior executives, the CEO, the board of directors, and I don't have to worry much about it. Sure, I'd like to have some oversight and double check make sure the message and the slide deck is great, but would have no reservations about, hey, this person's got what you need. Okay. And you need lieutenants. You absolutely need those high trust, high performance, a couple of those high performance relationships. Not everyone in the organization is going to have that level of expertise. You can't afford that many. You can't find that many. There's also just some clashes that come up with too many super ambitious people. It's a weird team dynamic if there's just not enough room, right? So you need to have that next layer of up and coming, and I would say people who have the ability, over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, move into that. And that's the deep expertise product management layer. And those, in designing a great org, each of the sort of group or director level product managers, however many you might then have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 product managers, junior, associate, product, maybe even senior product managers that operate with varying degrees of scope and varying degrees of autonomy, how much they need. I don't see those group level product managers managing more than 5 or 6 people. Typically, there's just so much scope typically beyond that. It's not like an engineering manager, where I managed a dozen or more individual developers. Product managers bring with them a lot of matrixed relationships that you kind of have to keep in mind. So I've found a sweet spot to be around, 3, 4, 5, 6 of managers of product managers.
Okay.
And then what I would say is that you've got 2 more sort of auxiliary functions that would help here. One auxiliary function would be project/program managers, the people that sort of grease the skids or oil in the engine that make everybody more effective, right? And that's the person who's not on the strategic side of things, but they're helping with a bunch of the dashboarding and the tracking, the project management, building the project plan, more emphasis on the high priority things, less of the detailed micro minutia on the less important ones. I'd like to see one of those project managers for every, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or so product managers. It's good to have at Google, we call them a TPM, a technical product manager. Other places, they're program managers or project managers, but they're an auxiliary to the whole team. And then the last auxiliary would be a group of business analysts, BAs, and depending on what your product is, having some really junior, super sharp, just out of school, maybe one day themselves a product manager, some BAs that just really nerd out on the data and the analysis. A couple of BAs can make an entire product team super effective and professional.
Awesome. I'm going to copy that game plan and apply it for us and for our client projects. Last question for you, or maybe 2, I don't know, we'll see. I want to ask, with your knowledge and everything that you have in the product management space, this might be a silly question, but in the year 2030, what do you think product managers will actually be doing on a daily basis? Where will their focus be?
Oh, wow. Good question. So, one thing I think we're going to see a massive evolution of just the dashboarding, the data, the analytics, the machine learning and insights. That's something that at the upper echelon of the Silicon Valley companies, and here I'm talking the Twitter and Netflix, Google, Microsofts of the world, and I'm just scratching the surface there. We're talking product decisions that are totally driven by really good data. Go and look at Netflix, and I swear to God, like the Squid Game was green lit for my exact persona. I love it. It's great. It ticks every box that I have, like everything I've ever liked, dystopian society, foreign film, kind of low budget, thriller, 8-9 part series, like across the board. That was just tailor made by a machine learning algorithm that said, find me more stories like this, green like those, because Dustin's going to watch all of them, right? And that happens, and that's a product management thing that happens all over the board at Tesla and other Apple, other companies making great products. I would say that the world at large and a small to medium business just doesn't have access to that kind of data and tooling and insights. But I guarantee you, a 300-person boutique software shop would benefit from that same data. The corner brewery or cafe would benefit from that same like data and insights. And so I think there's an element of product management that is just going to be completely wrapped around, data and insights that come from the data that product managers identify and have access to. To some extent, those critical user journeys should write themselves. That thing that I described, the who, what, when, why, could almost be an AI written thing with a value ascribed to it, and that is what happens for like a Netflix viewing profile or a Tesla's machine, self-driving algorithm. Those things are almost writing themselves at this point, but that hasn't scaled down to anything other than the ultra mega cap NASDAQ, tech companies so far today.
Great answer. I couldn't think of a better response, to be honest. No, that's so true, and I really like the idea of potentially having an AI system write out all of our user stories based on data, from different APIs or access to market information. That would be so cool. One day, right? One day.
No.
This was great, Dustin. We'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. I really appreciate it. Lots of wisdom shared. And for everybody who's going to be listening, tune in next time to hear more from other product innovation professionals sharing their insights.